ghost, ghost.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad
Ghost, ghost.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
They thought they could hold me in a physical cell? I'm ethereal! But hey, welcome to Book Sloth, the show where I give second and sometimes third chances to books that I never got to finish, cause I'm kind of a slow reader. In honor of the holiday, let me talk to you about the paranormal ghost drama by Doug Dorst. Physical objects. Pa! Live in Necropolis. But wait, how was I sitting in the chair?
What you want? What you want? What you gonna do?
Now, believe it or not, this is one of my more recent reading endeavors, only about 8 or so years ago when I was back in high school. I just picked it up on a whim. You know how a lot of libraries will have that new releases or recommended books section? Man, those things are Book Sloth bait for sure. So I got my hands on the book at least 2 different times in high school, but I always kind of drifted away. But I always remembered I gotta finish Necropolis. It was one of the major reasons I wanted to start Book Sloth in the first place. Just an extra incentive for me to actually finish the book. But when I checked our local library, they didn't have it listed. I even checked the old library system that I got it from originally, but it was nowhere to be found. Was it really that bad to be stricken from the list, or perhaps it met an unfortunate demise?
Mysterious.
Anyways, one look at the cover and I was immediately hooked. My mind swimming with possibilities. A gritty cop drama about patrolling a city of ghosts. Would it be Ghostbusters-esque with a lot of hijinks, or maybe it would be a murder mystery horror suspense novel? Maybe the living police department had to keep the undead population undercover and a secret from the rest of society. Or maybe it would be a world where an afterlife doesn't exist and it would tackle interesting and deep questions about the meaning of life. How could such a promising premise possibly let me down? Alright, I probably set myself up for disappointment, but could you blame me? I don't want to call you out, Doug, but how on earth can you possibly call yourself a creative writing teacher when you drop the ball so hard with such a knockout setting? I'm just gonna put this out there. This book does not need and did not need a single ghost in it. The very presence of ghosts actively brings down the whole story because they're not used in any meaningful capacity and basically are just a big cock tease. I was 90% of the way through the book and I was still waiting for a big climactic moment or some of the loose ends to get tied up, or any of the millions of inconsequential characters to actually serve a purpose, or something interesting to happen. Millions of characters. Totally not an over-exaggeration. There's 1.5 million characters. 1.5 million. What is it? 2 million. You got 2 million to work with. Not a one is interesting. So what went wrong, and what is Alive in Necropolis even about? I mean, I guess I should have been clued in by the first review on the back of the book. It's not quite a horror story, nor exactly a mystery, nor just a hard-boiled police procedural, but an adult coming-of-age saga that pulls with energy and imagination from these various genres. Now that's putting it generously, San Francisco Chronicle. It's like those people that argue that Die Hard is a classic Christmas movie. Enter Mike Mercer, 29-year-old rookie cop stationed in Colma, California, which is a real-life small town in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was founded as, guess what, a necropolis, which is basically just a city that was designed with a lot of large cemeteries and big tomb monuments. The back of the book and the first chapter heavily talk about the dead population of Colma dwarfing the living 1,000 to 1, and the official motto of Colma is, funnily enough, "It's great to be alive in Colma." So I get where the title's coming from. Alive in Necropolis. There's even a chapter later in the book that's titled after that famous motto, but why not try a more accurate title, like, say, Whiny, Horny People Holding Hands? It's a story full of spooks and crooks and ghosts and boners, and I'm not talking about skeletons. So Mike Mercer is this unfunny, uncharismatic clunker of a protagonist, especially for a predominantly romantic drama. He's just about as unlikable as you can get while still being just barely sympathetic enough. He's a straight man to a world full of weirdos, tightwads, and horn dogs, let alone the smattering of spectral characters who kind of just mind their own business and never intersect with the plot because bad writing. It's like there's two concurrent plots happening that only Mike is aware of, but he never bothers investigating until the final act where we get this stilted police report of the whole incident. Heaven forbid we get an actually satisfying action scene, however juxtaposed and uninteresting it is, but I'll talk about that in a minute. The meat of Necropolis is about Mercer's interpersonal relationships with his friends and cop buddies and romantic interests. But a lot of the dialogue is just the raw, crude, unfiltered trash talk of a bunch of 30-something-year-old cops slinging insults, innuendos, and sex. It comes to light that Mercer's been dating a much older woman, a nurse named Fiona, and everybody gives him a hard time about it. His partner Toronto is just this big-mouthed alcoholic who never shuts up about how much of a ladies' man he is and his smoking hot 24-year-old girlfriend. And even he comes out more likable than Mercer half the time. I understand that dialogue is probably pretty accurate to real life, but this is a work of fiction. Doesn't anybody have anything interesting to talk about other than sex? I mean, I read this book for the first time when I was a sophomore in high school and was pretty intrigued. I'd never read a book that was so salacious or had so many explicit sex scenes like in every other chapter. But now, as a single 25-year-old who hasn't had a girlfriend since high school, I kind of just have no interest in hearing about a bunch of guys talking about who's banging who, and these guys are all like 10 years older than me. By the way, ladies, come at me. It's not like I'm some prude who can't handle a little titillation. I actively enjoyed a handful of these scenes, but it feels like a crutch. It's like Doug can't go 2 chapters without having 2 characters boned down. And when he doesn't, we get these detailed daydreams about sex and constant checkups on Mercer's bulge. It comes across as lazy and kind of misguided. The major plot, if you can call it that, is that Mercer discovers this teenage boy who's been drugged and tied up in a cemetery, left to die during a party. The kid, Jude, turns out to be the angsty teen son of a famous local movie director. This sorta leads Mercer down a trail of investigating who did this to Jude, but he's not a detective, so the whole thing is kind of out of his hands. And Jude is being a total prick about it because he's got a crush on the girl who let this happen to him, and he's not going to rat anybody out. So it basically doesn't go anywhere until the very end of the book, where it practically repeats the same setup because all the characters are dumb and make the same stupid mistakes, and the book just wraps up. And the whole story is told from the perspective of no less than 7 unique characters, plus a smattering of other characters just for flavor. And none of the characters shed much light on the story. It just kind of chronicles a bunch of daily mundane things. Jude's scenes are particularly edgy, and he never learns his lessons. And actually, the girl he's got a crush on, Raina, is just the worst, because she's just the trashiest, unapologetic, delinquent whack job. Each chapter is just an endless string of inconsequential anecdotes, with characters just leaving and entering scenes without really accomplishing anything. It feels like a slice of real life, but that's not how you craft an interesting work of fiction. There's no arcs, there's no payoffs, there's no resolutions. It's just a threadbare plot with characters perpetually whining about their relationships or agonizing about their injuries and their lack of sleep. If that's what I've got to look forward to in my single adult life, just bury me in the ground right now. At least stuff's happening over on the other side. I mean, not really. In this universe, most deceased characters live out a sort of Groundhog Day scenario, reliving their lives at their peak. Although most have to carry physical representations of their death, like bullet holes or perpetually bleeding fingertips. A group of mafia gangsters goes around tormenting other dead people by brutally assaulting them, which only knocks them out temporarily, stealing the most prized possessions, of which most people cling on to or spend their whole lives trying to recover, and downright killing them again by way of sticking roots down their throats. The rules and lore of the ghost world feel so tacked on and unexplained. It's honestly just sort of a red herring, a carrot on a stick to keep you reading. Of course, it all has to mean something, We see glimpses of a previous officer who got involved and tried to kill the mafia, but they killed him instead. But curiously enough, he doesn't come back as a ghost, even though at least one other character definitely does come back as a ghost. We never quite get an explanation for what root even is, or where it comes from, or how it works, and why it can seemingly kill dead people. Apparently, human body heat can also kill you, which I guess is supposed to be a lazy explanation for why the dead people never interact or haunt people in the real world. We know that they can physically interact with the world and take physical objects and move them around, but nobody ever sees the ghost pilot flying his plane around, that he built from lumber that he stole from a junkyard in the real world. Did he kill the plane somehow? So the only real interesting things that happen in the story are following Mercer's love triangle with Fiona and this hot reporter gal named Kelly, who turns out to be this totally crazy, manipulative, drug addict nymphomaniac. The only redeeming characters in the whole story are Mercer's high school best friend and his longtime girlfriend, Owen and Molly. These characters are the best! Owen is a wildly successful entrepreneur, and Molly is this feisty public defender, and together they're super cute and supportive and the life of the party. Mike's the kind of friend who's just always a downer and constantly needs to be reassured. He adds nothing to the friendship, but these two are just way too nice to cut him out of their lives. So the book is slow, repetitive, and borderline pornographic, without an ounce of narrative structure. The book practically flops in every meaningful way, and if it weren't for the promise of an eventual spectral scuffle, then I would have had a hard time caring to finish. Now that's all well and good, but this is Book Sloth, for crying out loud. We don't care about characters or narrative or plot. We've got more important things to grade. It's time to judge the book by its cover. So what's here to gush about? Why was I so drawn to this book to give it a third chance when it clearly doesn't deserve it? So right off the bat, I love this cover illustration. It was drawn by award-winning Israeli-American illustrator and comic artist Tomer Hanuka. His style is very reminiscent of one of my comic idols, Brandon Graham, especially in his graphic novel The Divine. He does a lot of stylized, poppy depictions of very dark and graphic scenes. His graphic novel doesn't really look up my alley, but you can't deny the guy's got chops for visually arresting cover designs. I'd read every one of those pickin' books. I'd probably regret it, but look how dope these are. Anyway, Necropolis depicts pretty much the only interesting and relevant scene in the whole book, where Mercer leads the charge to find Jude tied up in the cemetery. And Mercer looks perfect. He looks tense and inexperienced, but poised to act and feeding off the rush of excitement, just like he does in the book. His wide stance has him peeking out from the back cover, and his body follows a smooth arc from the bright flashlight up to his head and down again to his holstered gun. The sea of graves fan out in all directions and fade into a skyline of mausoleums and palm fronds, perfectly encapsulating the oppressive city of the dead. The crumbling graves strewn about feel uneasy, like the dead have already sprung out of their resting places. Mercer stands in front of the grave of famous cartographer Alfred H. Novel. Yeah, no, that's just a goofy cover design trick. Honestly, doesn't look like it was part of the original illustration either, because there was somebody credited as the cover designer. I never understood the reasoning for the distinction. Might as well say, "A Book, You Dummy" by Doug Dorst. Especially since there's that dumb New York Times quote at the top saying as much. I mean, if you got a quote like that, might as well flaunt it. Probably my favorite part is the caution tape yellow title card on the deep blues of the illustration. That contrast is perfection. Blues and oranges have been a staple of appealing color contrast in design for a long time and has really picked up in recent years, but this works just as well and is even thematically appropriate. It looks particularly good on the thick 400-page spine. This thing will stand out on any shelf, and the A novel looks a lot nicer here, with a nice perpendicular cross-section dividing the title and the name. Even the Riverhead Books logo looks classy. Now, the back is where things start to go off the rails a bit. I kinda hate all this stuff. First of all, I think the illustration is nice. While I always enjoy a good wraparound image when appropriate, it would have been a complete cluster if they tried to keep all these friggin' reviews back here, so we do get a nice semi-wrap into the spine, and they both have a very appealing gradient going from the darkest part of the sky to mirroring the silhouettes on the ground. Very nice. While I appreciate the color-coded preview and titles, there's just way too much reading on the back here. The font is at least as large as it is on the inside, albeit in a nice sans serif similar to the titles, but come on. And these reviews are insanely positive too. Too positive, if you ask me. You gotta wonder what the ellipses left out. Shot through streaks of black humor, insightful effect, but ultimately a book so uneventful it kept me up at night. The process of reading Alive in Necropolis proves truly haunting. Yeah, something like that, I bet. And for a first book, too, Doug was really trying to put his best foot forward, but really all the reviews kind of reiterate the same stuff and reference a lot of bigwig novels that I can't be bothered to look into. It's all kind of pretentious and doesn't accurately portray the ratio of spooks to awkward phone calls and filling out paperwork. Again, this is a hefty paperback, but really satisfying to hold and easy to flip through. It doesn't look half as long as it feels to read. It's a nice sort of matte finish to it as well, so it has some grip and texture to it without feeling plasticky or cardboardy. So in the end, Alive in Necropolis gets a 4 out of 5 stars for its great cover and book feel. The back, while nicely laid out and organized, feels repetitive and bloated while building up and reinforcing a false idea of what to expect in the narrative, but that's just the way Book Sloth goes, praising great artists and designers while bashing on bad writers. And the official reading rate for Necropolis comes in at a blistering speed of 0.1497 pages per day. So have a happy Halloween, and I'll be back with another book, eventually. But until then, I'm Ghost. I have so many regrets. Thank you.